The assassination of Abraham Lincoln is one of the most infamous crimes in American history. But what if we don't know the full story? The official version tells us that John Wilkes Booth was a lone fanatic with a grudge. But was there a larger conspiracy? Why did so many people connected to Booth meet strange fates? And did Booth even die that night? Or did he escape? Let's unravel the web of conspiracies surrounding the Lincoln murder here on MKUSUAL.
I don't ever think about the Lincoln assassination except when I see the Whitest Kids You Know sketch.
What was that? What did they kill him?
John Wilkes Booth is in the theater and he's trying to take his wife on a date, and Abraham
Lincoln won't shut up.
Yeah, he's like, "Now you fucked up. Now you fucked up." He just and that's why he kills him, because he won't stop talking during the play.
You know what? Plausible.
I just I don't really know that much about it. It's just like, oh, he probably pissed off a bunch of people when he freed the slaves.
Well, that's it. I mean, he was an extremely powerful president. I mean, he also suspended habeas corpus, did some questionable. I mean, you could argue he cut some corners, but we look back fondly because he ended the war, saved the Union, freed the slaves.
Yeah.
So the official story is that on April 14th, 1865, just 5 days after the Civil War ended, Lincoln attended Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer, shot Lincoln in the back of the head at point-blank range. After stabbing Major Henry Rathbone, Booth leapt from the balcony, shouting "Sic semper tyrannis," or "Thus always to tyrants." Booth fled into the night, starting a 12-day manhunt that ended in a burning barn in Virginia. He was pretty slippery.
Dude, he dove off the balcony. That's crazy.
What was that? Okay, I need to find it. We can't do this episode without the famous, I think it was the 70s, between JFK and Lincoln assassinations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I gotta find it. Let's see here. Both presidents were elected to the presidency in 1960, 1860s. Both presidents were elected to the United States House of Representatives in 46. Both were runners-up for the party's nomination for vice president in 56. Both successors were Southern Democrats named Johnson, born in 08. Both presidents were concerned with the problem of American blacks and made their views strongly known. In 63, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1862, which became law in 1863. In 1963, Kennedy presented his reports to Congress on civil rights, the same year as the famous March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Both presidents shot in the head. Both presidents shot in the back of the head. Allegedly. Both presidents were shot in the presence of their wives. They were both shot on a Friday. They were both accompanied by another couple. That must have been the major guy. The male companion of the other couple was wounded by the assassin. Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln automobile made by Ford. That's weird. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy who told him not to go to the theater. And Kennedy had a secretary named Evelyn Lincoln, who was born 100 years after Lincoln and whose husband Harold, nickname was Abe, who warned him not to go to Dallas. Both Lee Harvey Oswald and John Wilkes Booth were killed before they could be put on trial. Lincoln and Kennedy each have 7 letters. That's a tenuous one. Lincoln and Kennedy both have 5 syllables in their full name. John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald each have 15 letters and 3 words. There are 6 letters in each of Johnson's first names. Booth ran from a theater to a warehouse, and Oswald ran from a warehouse to a theater.
It's crazy.
History rhymes. can't have a conspiracy episode without bringing that up. Okay, so that's the story. That's the official story. But there were conspirators. And this is known. One, Mary Surratt, the first woman ever executed by the U.S. government, owned the boarding house where the plot was allegedly planned, maintained her innocence, but the government claimed she passed messages between Booth and Confederate spies. She was hung on July 7th, 1865, and was possibly a scapegoat. Louise Powell. I have a friend named Louise Powell. The brutal assassin, tasked with killing Secretary of State William Seward, broke into Seward's home and violently stabbed him and his family, but failed to kill him, captured days later, and was hanged. David Harold, the loyal accomplice, helped Booth escape through the Maryland and Virginia. Surrendered.
Is this the same Seward who bought Alaska?
I believe so. Seward's Folly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway.
But wait a minute.
Well, it says the 1867 purchase of Alaska. William H. Seward.
I didn't realize it was that long ago. Yeah, that's him, man. That's the guy.
So he tried to kill him but didn't?
Stabbed him a bunch of times, but he just kept living.
Well, okay.
Damn you, Seward. Buying Alaska. Okay. There was David Harold. Oh, I already did him. He was hung despite playing a minor role. Surrendered at Garrett Farm, where Booth was shot. George Adzerat. Oh, go ahead.
Well, that's probably the same farm where they burned the barn
Burned
down?
the barn, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, let's see. Garrett Farm, where John Wilkes Booth died. Burned a barn. I wonder if you can go see. I wonder if they left it up. Fatally shot by Union Sergeant Boston Corbett through a crack in the burning barn. Oh, wow. So they set it on fire. The Garrett family, suspecting the fugitives might steal horses, locked them in the barn. Union soldiers surrounded the barn. I wonder how long all this took.
Right.
They didn't have telephones.
Right.
It's just like a days long. Yep, they're still in the barn. Union soldiers surrounded the barn and a fire broke out, forcing... Oh, he was trying to maybe burn his way out. Forcing Booth and Harold to try to escape. Sergeant Corbett, watching Booth through a crack in the burning barn, fired a shot that severed his spinal cord, paralyzing him. Booth was pulled from the barn, and a doctor determined he would soon die. In his final moments, Booth said, "Tell my mother I die for my country," and then said, "Useless, useless." Booth died on the porch of the Garrett farmhouse around 7:15 a.m. His body was transported to Washington, D.C., and an autopsy confirmed his identity. Supposedly, Corbett's actions prevented the capture and interrogation of Booth, which many in Washington had hoped for. Well, that's suspicious right up there. That's just like Jack Ruby.
Yeah.
Killing Lee Harvey Oswald so we couldn't like get his story.
I'm still kind of hung up on the Confederate spies. That's hilarious to me. Well, dang, brother, we gotta sneak in there and get them documents.
Oh, dang old 007 over here. I could even...
We gotta do some espionage.
I ain't no spy. I'm just one of you Yankees. I love the Negro.
Some hillbilly spies. So funny.
Okay.
But that guy, Boston, that's like such a fucking bad spy name. Like, what should we call him? We're from the South. What's up north? Okay, your name is Boston. You're going to be our agent.
I love baseball.
Tea. Never drank the stuff. Or I love it.
I like that
what
tea bland as hell. Give it to me straight.
No sugar in my tea.
Can't stand this stuff. Oops, I accidentally spilt some sugar in the tea. I guess I'll go ahead and drink it so I'm not rude to you, my fellow Yanks.
He almost got it. So he could be the fucking the double agent that killed him so he couldn't be interrogated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Depending on how
Okay.
deep this goes.
Sergeant Corbett. Let's see here. Double agent. English-born American soldier. Well, the English were pro-Confederate for a time.
It's probably something to do with trade and affordable labor.
Today I learned Boston Corbett, the man who shot and killed John Wilkes Booth, castrated himself with a pair of scissors years earlier. What?
That's just
People were just built different.
patently insane. Why?
Why did you do it? I need to see.
He lost a bet. They're like, oh no, they caught him. He's a spy. And they're like, prove it. And he's like, watch this. Would a spy do this?
He changed his name from Thomas Corbett.
See, I'm telling you, man. This is the linchpin.
This is the linchpin.
This thing falls apart if we discover the true identity of Boston Corbett.
Corbett became unhinged after the death of his first child. Seeking solace in the bottle, he staggered up and down New England. What? That's a long way to stagger. I've been staggering since Boston.
Several hundred miles.
He just staggered from bar to bar up and down the East Coast until one night in the late 1850s, he happened upon an animated scene on a Boston corner, a street evangelist holding court. Corbett was mesmerized by the message of God. He became regular at sidewalk churches around the city. This guy can't do anything normal. The ministers eventually encouraged him to stake out a corner of his own. Different days, not so much because the young man had potential, but to keep his annoying choruses at a distance. He would yell, "Glory to God, come to Christ." They're like, dude, you know you're annoying when a street preacher is like, can you please get away from me?
Go over there.
Corbett, now 26, took his advice. He swore off liquor, grew out his beard and long hair, styling himself in the image of Jesus. He also surrendered himself to baptism by a Methodist minister and was born again in Boston in recognition of the town that saved him from the drink. He changed his name.
Okay.
His rash tendencies exhibited themselves in strange ways. One day while he was ministering in the summer of 1858, Corbett was ogled by a pair of prostitutes, and the lower half of his body responded invitingly. Uh-oh. He saw a prostitute. He then went home, took a pair of scissors, snipped an incision under his scrotum, and removed his testicles, then headed out to a prayer meeting. Hey, boys.
Hey, Boston, you feeling okay? You look a little pale.
Well, I just cut my nuts off.
I think he left his scrotum. So you knew what he was doing, though. If you just cut it, there's probably a lot of blood vessels. You probably bleed out.
Corbett made himself a eunuch and didn't check himself into a Massachusetts General Hospital until he'd finished his prayers, had a full dinner, and took a light stroll through the city.
At least a few ounces lighter.
What? After healing from his own castration, he was a hat maker. He moved to New York City, resuming his trade. Mad as a hatter, dude. Remaining a zealot, often attending daytime services at YMCA. What is this? This should be the episode.
This is crazy.
This is from the Washingtonian.com. His pious impulses also drew him into uniform. In 1861, among the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter, Corbett enlisted in the Northern Army, telling the women at his church that when he came eye to eye with the gray-suited enemies, I will say to them, God have mercy on your souls, quote, and then pop them off.
Sounds like
He's just like an insane person. This guy's a freaking nutter.
Quit drinking. Still talks like he's hammered, though. I'm gonna pop this gray bastard off.
Wow. So he popped off on one of his colonels, got in trouble, sent him to the guardhouse jail, where his soldiers proceeded to one-up his commanding officer by singing hymns at the top of his lungs. He sent a messenger to warn the impetuous prisoner to stop it or else, but Corbett would not stop seeking. This person is clearly insane. His colonel, Butterfield, finally offered to release Corbett in exchange for an apology. He responded, "No, I have only offended the colonel while the colonel has offended God. And I shall never ask the colonel's pardon until he himself is the pardon of God." He was then exasperated and released Corbett from jail. 4 years later, as the North was celebrating the South's surrender, a stage actor and rebel sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth, snuck into Lincoln's box on the balcony of Ford's Theater in Washington. The president and his wife were watching Our American Cousin, blah, blah, blah. We already said this. Booth took his .44 caliber Derringer pistol, shot Lincoln in the back of the head. Even half crippled, he leapt from the balcony to the stage, caught up in the spur of the moment with a broken leg. He eluded capture. Corbett by now was a hardened combat soldier and insane person. He re-enlisted 3 times, surviving traumatic events that had felled other men. Back in June 1864, while hunting Mosby's men, Corbett had found himself cornered by a so-called gray ghost. Oh, wow. Okay, there's a ghost story here. Corbett found himself cornered by the so-called Gray Ghost troops near Centerville, Virginia. Oh, that's just what they called them. His fellow soldiers were nearly compelled to surrender. According to Harper's Weekly, Corbett was not. He stood out manfully and fired his revolver in 12 shots from the breech-loading rifle before surrendering. Okay, well, that's a whole other thing.
That was a fun detour.
I wonder how long. I still want to know how long it took them to get to the midnight, April 26th. After knocking on several doors, Doherty's men found Jet at a hotel and rousted him from bed. Booth and Harold fled. Garrett claimed they were in the woods, but Doherty didn't buy it, so he later told the Washington Brass he seized this man by the collar and pulled him out the door. After 2 a.m., Doherty's men descended on a tobacco barn and formed a ring around it, Corbett included. From inside, Booth was trying to talk himself out of the jam. "Captain, draw off your men 50 yards, Booth shouted. According to a soldier in the 16th Cavalry, "A cripple as I am with only one leg and cannot walk without a crutch. I would like a chance for my life," but Doherty refused. It was dark, but there were cracks in the barn. From his position, Corbett claimed to have eyes on the shifty target. He wanted to charge the barn himself, but when he asked for permission to try flushing the assassin out in the open, he was denied. Meanwhile, the back and forth between Booth and Doherty continued for an hour until Booth yelled that there was a man here who wants to surrender awful bad. Concluding that their target was never coming out, a federal investigator named Everton Conger took a clutch of dry hay, lit it on fire, and stuck it through the cracks in the barn. As the flames climbed towards the night sky, Corbett made his move towards the barn for a better look and pulled the trigger. "What on earth did you shoot for?" yelled Lafayette Baker, another government detective, as he rushed to yank Booth out of the burning barn. The orders from Washington were not to take the fugitive dead or alive. The War Department wanted Booth in the flesh. His motives for killing Lincoln were still a mystery, and officials knew that they had conspiracy to root out, possibly even one orchestrated by Confederate President Jefferson Davis. They needed their target to be alive for the talk. He was then taken to the front porch of the Garrett house, placed in a makeshift mattress. "Kill me," he whispered. He asked to see his hands, so one of the soldiers lifted his paralyzed limbs. "Useless, useless," Booth muttered, dying around 7 a.m. The government detectives immediately cast aspersions on Corbett, the trigger-happy sergeant who had just deprived the nation of a trial for the president's murderer. Corbett said, "God Almighty himself directed me to do it." He almost was court-martialed, but was spared. He collected his share of the award money, $1,600 of the $50,000 reward. He became a folk hero. Okay, all right. Well, very fascinating. Wow. Okay.
Sorry.
No. I'm really glad I Googled that. What the hell? Okay, so the other accomplice to Booth, George Adzarad, was signed to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, but lost his nerve, drank heavily, and never attempted the murder. Still hung for the conspiracy.
Okay.
Okay. The escape theory. Did Booth really die? The official version. Booth was shot and killed in the Virginia barn on April 26th. His body was burned beyond recognition. Some claim that...
Okay, it already said they took him to do an autopsy, and that confirmed it was him. So, like...
Yeah, but what do you have to go on back then?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, how would they know it was him?
Yeah.
Dental records, maybe? Like, you could...
Okay. All right.
See, this isn't lining up.
Well, this is the conspiracy theory. Yeah, something's not lining up. Here's where we get into some interesting stuff. Some claim the man killed wasn't Booth, but a Confederate lookalike named James William Boyd. Booth allegedly escaped to Texas, then later to South America, where all good races go. In 1903, a man named John St. Helen in Texas claimed to be Booth on his deathbed. And in 1931, a mummy surfaced in Oklahoma, rumored to be Booth's preserved corpse. I gotta look up John St. Helen. That's an interesting... People say weird shit on their deathbeds. The Mummy and Bates role. Bates, a lawyer and author, became fascinated with the story and claimed to have obtained the body of David E. George, who allegedly committed suicide in Enid, Oklahoma, and who Bates claimed was John St. Helen / Booth. He had the body mummified and displayed as the true body of Booth, traveling with it as a sideshow attraction. He claimed the mummified body had features consistent with both Booth, including a scarred eyebrow, a crushed thumb, and a broken leg. Okay. John Wilkes Booth's family has attempted to exhume his body and compare DNA samples with those of his brother, Edwin, to disprove the escape theory, but the requests have been denied by courts. I wonder why that is. Why don't they just let him test their relative?
Yeah, that's interesting also.
I gotta look up evidence that John Wilkes Booth went to South America. Is there a picture of him hanging out with Hitler? Thoughts from an assassin. Okay. John Wilkes Booth, Unsolved Mysteries. Some believe Lincoln's assassin was not killed by Union soldiers but escaped and lived until 1903. That's a very specific date. Oh. All right, I'm going to throw up this picture of John Wilkes Booth and the guy who claimed to be him. I mean, I got to say,
Look pretty similar.
They look pretty similar. He just looks a little bit disheveled. Those who challenge the official account believe that in the confusion following the Civil War, evidence may have been recorded incorrectly or perhaps even covered up. Even some high-ranking military officers question the official story of Booth's death. In the early 1900s, John Shoemaker, the Army's general counsel to the Department of Army, wrote, "The evidence put forth by the government to support the conclusion that the body was that of John Wilkes Booth was so insubstantial that it would not hold up in a court of law." Dr. Arthur Chitty spent years independently studying the Lincoln assassination. According to Chitty, they arrived at the same conclusion. The most persuasive evidence to me, at Garrett's barn, that the man in the barn was not Booth is the fact that his friend David E. Harold came out of the barn and the first thing he said was, The man in there is not Booth.
Explains why he wanted to surrender so bad.
Yeah.
But they wanted to take him alive, so...
In a sworn affidavit, Wilson Kinsey, who was then 77 years old, says what he saw at Garrett's farm in a sworn affidavit. As they rode up, Joe Zigzin called, "Here, come here, Sergeant. This ain't John Wilkes Booth at all. I could see the color of his hair. I knew at once it wasn't he. His body was exposed and he had no injured leg." Nate Orlowek says the men were told to keep the truth a secret. Quote, "And he said that the officers told them there will be dire consequences for anyone who tells the truth. The military really meant business, and they were not going to risk their lives just to tell the truth." He says the government autopsy was performed by a physician who was acquainted with Booth, Dr. John F. May, a Washington surgeon who removed a tumor from the back of Booth's neck a few months before the assassination. His statement is now in the National Archives. Like all the other government records of the case, it's held secret. It was held secret for 70 years. Dr. Chitty, who independently studied this, claims that, like others, Dr. May was pressured into lying. John Frederick May wanted to tell the truth, and he recognized that this was not Booth. But it was made pretty clear to him, and very early on, that this, quote, better be Booth. And so we have the curious affidavit, which starts out by saying, "I'm sure this is Booth." And then goes on to say, quote, "But it doesn't look like Booth. But it's certainly Booth. Signed, John Frederick May." Nate Orlowek cites a lack of documentation. Quote, "Now, had the government really believed that the body was Booth's, they would have taken pictures of it. They would have many, many hundreds of people identify it, but the War Department simply didn't do that. The government knew that the man was not Booth. The body was secretly buried in the basement of the old naval prison in Washington. But if John Wilkes Booth was not killed at Garrett's farm, what happened to him? In 1865, the government moved quickly to close the book on the Lincoln assassination. The trial of John Wilkes Booth's co-conspirators resulted in 4 hangings and 3 life sentences. Details of the conspiracy were classified as secret and hidden away. Today, some experts believe Booth actually escaped and lived in the South under assumed names for 38 years. In 1907, an attorney from Texas named Finis Bates published a book called The Escape and Suicide of John Wilkes Booth. In its pages, Bates claimed that he learned the true history of Booth from a man named St. John Helen of Granbury, Texas. In 1877, when John St. Helen was seriously ill and afraid he was about to die, he made a startling confession to Bates. He said his real name was John Wilkes Booth. St. Helen explained that all the bridges out of Washington were closed after nightfall and heavily guarded, but he had been given a password that allowed him to cross. According to Nate Orlowek, one of the guards on duty that night, a man named Frederick Demond, wrote a letter that supports this account. In that letter, Demond said that at about 10 p.m. that night, a captain rode up to the bridge and said if anyone comes up using a certain password, let him through. The password was TB Road. Desmond says that was very peculiar because never before had anyone been allowed to cross the bridge using a password. Oh. Okay.
I looked up St. Helen. I thought maybe there would be... Like, maybe he chose that name for a reason. Like, you know, like you watch, like, a spy movie and they like baseball, so he always picks, like, a baseball player's pseudonym or something. I don't know if this... I'm just going to... St. Helen was the mother of Constantine. She's best known for her pilgrimage to the Holy Land, where she is credited with discovering the true cross of Jesus. So I don't know. I just thought maybe there would be some kind of parallel there, but it's not. Someone who discovers the truth. I don't know. Anyway,
this is we can't go without mentioning. While the story of Booth's escape seems hard to believe, the Smithsonian Institute concluded it was worth a closer look. The Smithsonian proposed exhuming the body of the man killed at Garrett's farm. The man officially named as John Wilkes Booth. The Booth family agreed, however, a state court refused permission.
So where it said it was a naval prison. Where was the prison? Or what state?
Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay.
Buried him in the basement.
Interesting.
JWB got away.
I'm gonna go with I think this is true. I think he did get away.
Yes. Oh, this gets deeper.
So far, it's not the official story and the scandals around it.
Booth had ties to the Confederate operatives in Canada, known as the Canadian Cabinet. John Surratt, Mary Surratt's son, fled to Europe, joined the Pope's army in Italy, captured years later but never convicted. Did he know something was too dangerous? Jefferson Davis may have approved the assassination. An army tribunal attempted to tie him to the conspiracy but failed to provide hard proof. The missing pages of Booth's diary. Booth kept a diary during his escape. I'm sure that's a read. When recovered by federal agents, several pages were missing, possibly removed to hide evidence of a larger conspiracy. What were on those pages? Some speculate they contained names of high-ranking officials involved in the plot.
Possibly on the Union side.
Yeah, I mean, Lincoln was so powerful. I mean,
He would have been hated for a lot of things, too. Well, this is a good one. This is a good mystery.
There you have it. History's mysteries. Did John Wilkes Booth act alone? What's the deal with all these other people? What's the deal with this guy cutting his own balls off? John St. Helen, man. John St. Helen might actually be John Wilkes Booth.
It did go with John. So that would be something like if I were in witness, I would have, like...
Yeah, you'd have to have a first name that you respond to.
Like if my name was Mark, people would be like, I would introduce myself and then forget I was that. It would take a long time to get used to responding to Mark. Create this weird identity crisis.
Fascinating.
Yeah, this is a good one.
All right. Well, any final thoughts?
I think he got away. I think there's a real mystery here.
Yeah, all these doctors and people involved in the shooting saying it wasn't him. That guy coming out of the barn and saying it wasn't him.
Well, it was saying he was burned beyond recognition, but then and then they say, oh, this is him, obviously. So it just doesn't add up.
I think maybe the most compelling piece of evidence is that this John St. Helen guy told the story about the password of the bridge. Mm-hmm. And then that guy's diary says, yeah, it's really weird. We didn't normally do that, but that night we did that. So, how would he know that?
Right.
I would like to know if the John St. Helen, I would like to know if he said the password, because if it matches that TB Road thing, that to me would be almost definitive proof. The doctor, his note that says it doesn't look like John Wilkes Booth, but it's definitely John Wilkes Booth.
And then if there was a conspiracy, they're like, yep, that's good enough for
the missing diary pages. That's similar to the Meriwether Lewis.
Yeah.
How his diary had a bunch of missing pages. I wonder if you can read John Wilkes Booth diary. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can, yeah. National Park Service has it for some reason. That's an odd.
That is odd. All these conspiracies happen right after around the time of a major land purchase, expansion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that was right after the Louisiana Purchase, and then the Seward's Folly was, I think it said 1864.
1856-ish. It was around the time.
I just looked at it. 1867.
67. Okay, so a little after.
But they would have been planning for this, and I don't know.
Okay. Well, if you like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in.
We love you.